Can you believe we're almost a quarter of the way through the CHL season already? Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the CHL Top 10 Show. As always, my name is Scott Van Kunit, and as promised, today I chat with the editor-in-chief of the Hockey News, Ryan Kennedy. We discuss some of the top teams in the CHL right now, some surprise players, which 2024 NHL Draft prospects have been impressing, who to keep an eye on for the 2025 NHL Draft, and what new and really exciting feature is now available at the Hockey News. Here's Ryan Kennedy. Really excited to welcome back to the show today the editor-in-chief of the Hockey News, Ryan Kennedy. Ryan, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Really glad that you can make the time to come on. It's really starting to feel like hockey season. I know I've said it the last couple of weeks, but my kids had their first bus cancellation of the season today, so it's really starting to feel like hockey season. How excited are you that everything's going and we're really in the throes of it now?
Yeah, very excited, and sort of an interesting time where you're still seeing a couple of big names filter back to the OHL. Obviously, the Kitchener Rangers getting Roman Schmidt back from the Tampa Bay Lightning organization. They got Philip Mesar back not too long ago as well, and they were already playing incredibly. So interesting just to see how those things pan out. Before that, Dalibor Dvorsky going to Sudbury. So fun times. It's fun just to see the wealth of talent there.
Yeah, and like you said, Kitchener getting Mesar and Roman Schmidt back. They played in the CHL game of the week last night. Mesar picked up a goal and 2 assists. He's got points in every single game, so I'm sure Habs fans are excited to see what he's doing. But let's dive right in and we'll talk about offense. And there might not be anybody who puts up more points than Jordan Dumais of the Halifax Mooseheads this year, and picking up right where he left off the last 2 seasons. He's got 21 points in 8 games, 9 of those goals. What more does Jordan Dumais have to prove?
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to give a saucy answer, I would say to grow 3 inches, but he has proven time and again that he is one of those smaller players that just gets the job done. And I think what's going to be really fascinating to see is when Canada's World Junior Camp comes up, not too long from now, I might point out, probably about a month from now, where does Jordan Dumais fit into their plans? And this is a kid that, he has actively used that chip on his shoulder to prove the doubters wrong. Columbus, I mean, it's already looking like a steal of a pick when they got him. But like I say, he just keeps producing, and he's clearly got that competitive fire. And it's going to be very fun to see, particularly in junior. Like, I mean, if we're forecasting down the road, the NHL is a totally different animal. And,
Right.
We've seen smaller players before where it either takes them a long time or it takes, a change of scenery. I'm thinking about Trey Fix-Wolanski, another Columbus, product, or not. I mean, he's not from there, but he's with the Blue Jackets. You look at Matthew Phillips, and he had that great training camp with Washington, but originally he was with Calgary. So hopefully for Dumais, it's more of a straight line, and the Blue Jackets give him chances down the road. But for now, yeah, he's just dominating because that's what's in front of him.
Yeah, and that's the thing about those smaller players. They just need to have a coach that's willing to take a chance on them and give them a little bit of leash to show what they can do offensively.
Indeed. And, you look at the Halifax Mooseheads, and it's funny. I think last year he set the franchise record for points in a season. And keep in mind, this is a franchise that had Nathan McKinnon, Jakub Voracek, Jonathan Drouin, Nico Hischier. Like, there were some awesome players in Halifax over the years. Jordan Dumais outscored them all in one season.
Yeah, and in short order, he will have every offensive record in Halifax and goals and points and assists. He's already got the assist record, so he's going to be one of the all-time great franchise players for that team. Already is. What about the rest of the team? Like, you look at their team last year, and they made it to the Q final, losing to the eventual Memorial Cup champion Quebec Rampart. They lost a lot of offense, and I know that you got Marcus Vidicek and Matthew Cataford that are ready to take another step, and then you got a rookie in Lou Levesque who seems to be performing pretty well here. But are they going to be able to make up all that lost offense this year?
It's tough to say. I think that Cataford is probably the linchpin there. As great as Dumais has been already, you want to see that growth from draft year to, now you've been drafted into the NHL, and, Cataford taken by the Vegas Golden Knights in round 3. Another player that, he's not small. He's 5'11", about 190. But, he was, I don't want to say in the same mold as Dumais, but, he was on the lighter side for scouts, and they wanted to see him get stronger. And, again, a guy that's been a great playmaker for them. So, I mean, there's definitely potential with these Mooseheads. I would say that, you look at the goaltending they're getting right now from Mathis Rousseau, and that's big, especially for a kid that's, a 2004 birthday, a 937 save percentage. That's pretty hot. So it's interesting because
and a goal.
And there you go, and a goal. So he's chipping in on both ends. It's interesting because I think we've seen in the CHL lately, when it comes to like playoffs and even the Memorial Cup, experience in net has really helped. And, Rousseau's younger, but I mean, if he's getting the job done, then, I think you just kind of ride him and see how far you can go. Because, again, yeah, you look at this team and they're not an old team, right? I mean, they got a lot of sort of 18, 19-year-olds, Logan Crosby, 17. So this isn't necessarily the end of their window, but it would be probably one of the best chances with Dumais there, obviously.
And they've shown that they're always willing to go out and add if they find a piece that's willing or able to help them in the run. The other team, since we started in the queue, we might as well stick in the queue for a little bit here. And you mentioned the importance of veteran goaltending. Well, the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies went out and got Will Rousseau, who just happened to be the Memorial Cup winning goalie with Quebec last year. They got off to a little bit of a slow start where they weren't able to kind of finish in extra time. They're heating up now. What do you like about the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies?
Well, this is an organization that just seems to get it, right? Like they figured out that kind of like CHL cycle where, they go for it. They manage to, get the guys that are going to help them get to the next level. And, you talked about, Halifax willing to make moves. I think we've seen the Huskies, particularly in Memorial Cup years, go out and get like a Noah Dobson, for example. So an interesting team for me. And you make a great point about Rousseau. Like this is a guy that's already done it, right? And, much like his counterpart in Halifax there, neither of them have like a ton of size. I think Rousseau's listed at 6'1", which, I mean, for major junior, that's totally fine. But there's almost a bit of an advantage where you're going to get maximum development time with these kids because there's no rush to go to the pro level. So for me, Rouyn-Noranda is one of those teams that I always kind of keep an eye on because if they're not rebuilding, then they're in the mix, and they're in the mix in a serious way.
Yeah, and not a lot of, we'll say, star power on that team. They have some very good junior players, but there's not a lot of star power on that team.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we've seen over the years is they managed to put together a team, and they're very good with their veterans and their overagers, where, again, it's not necessarily the first round NHL draft picks, but they've built a very good culture there, and they know how to kind of retain guys and make the most of the players they have. So, yeah, to me, again, this is one of those teams where if they're at that high point of the cycle, they're always one to look out for.
And another interesting team out of the queue this year would be the Baie-Comeau Drakkar, who are led by the Justins. That's overager Justin Gill and Justin Poirier, not to be confused with his brother Jeremy Poirier, who's in Calgary's system. They might be the hottest team in the CHL right now, and they're riding a 9-game win streak. Are we seeing them take that next step into a contender category? Because we've usually been able to see the top 4 or 5 teams in the queue, and we haven't seen Baie-Comeau up there in a while. So it's kind of nice to see them seemingly make that next step this year.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to keep an eye on them. When you have an older player like Justin Gill really sort of make the most of that season so far. I mean, 31 points in 17 games. That's pretty hot. I know at one point he was leading the league in scoring. I'm not sure if he still is, but this is a team where a bit older, and they do have Poirier, as you mentioned, and he's kind of the next generation. And it was very exciting for him to come to town. But I think this is one of those teams where they have that veteran presence, and you look at the goaltending. That's an area that they can probably improve upon as the year goes by. Neither of the goaltenders right now has a 900 save percentage, so there's room for growth there. And I mean, and who knows, if they're really serious, maybe they hit the open market at the trade deadline and say, we like what we have up front, but we might need to sort of juice the lineup a little bit. So that'll be interesting to see, what the Drakkar do, because again, like a franchise like this, they're not always at the top. So if you think you have that opportunity, maybe you go for it.
The last team in the queue that we'll touch on would be the Drummondville Voltigeurs, and they signaled their intention to push this year when they made the trade for Ethan Gauthier and brought him in this year. They're another team that got off to a bit of a slow start, but they seem to be picking it up lately. A little bit more star power on that team, a little bit more firepower. What do you like about Drummondville?
Well, Ethan Gauthier, a great place to start. And as we're doing this interview, Scott, we are closing an issue of the Hockey News, and Ethan Gauthier is actually featured in our prospect section, talking about how cool it is to come back to Drummondville, where his dad played and has some pretty deep roots. So a fun homecoming for Ethan Gauthier. I think technically he was born in Arizona, but like Drummondville is home. Yeah, this is a team that they have those exciting high-end parts. Gauthier being the Tampa Bay pick, that's obviously a big one. But then you look at Maveric Lamoureux and the Arizona Coyotes. It's kind of fun for me when I look at how they've been drafting under GM Bill Armstrong, because it's like all huge kids, and a lot of them have different skill sets. But Maveric Lamoureux, obviously one of the biggest kids in his draft class at like 6'7". The fact that he's a point per game player right now as a defenseman, and as a defenseman, frankly, that we saw more as a mobile guy that obviously had that great reach when it was his draft year. For him to really start putting up points at the sort of later stages of his junior career is obviously huge for the Voltigeurs. So a very interesting team. Riley Mercer giving them some pretty solid goaltending. That's obviously Dawson Mercer's brother, which is kind of cool. And for me, 6'2", that's like perfect for a netminder. I love netminders with size, and 6'2" is sort of like the good starting point. Anything 6'2" and above, for me, you got a lot of potential there. And Mercer has a lot of experience, so that's great as well. Tyler Peddle, I would love to see him get back on track, because early in his career, he looked like he was going to be a house on fire, and he's gone through a lot of adversity, I know, with injuries. But it'd be great to see him get on track for Drummondville, because that would just add another layer to them.
For sure, yeah. He's a goal scorer when he's going, so just to get him going would be a huge boon for that team. Let's keep talking about goals, and let's head out west and maybe one of the most electrifying teams in the CHL this year with Mark Lamb's Prince George Cougars. Um, you know, they seem to be scoring at will this year. They kind of remind me of the previous two seasons, Winnipeg Ice, where they're just high scoring game after high scoring game. Uh, Terik Parascak, what can you say about him? A rookie who's coming in. He's leading the CHL, tied for the lead in CHL with 18 goals. Like it's pretty impressive what they've been doing so far.
Certainly. And I'll admit, like, I mean, he was not on my radar at all coming into this season. And, when things started up and you see this kid putting up multi-point games and sort of devastating multi-point games at that, it was like, ooh, okay, there's definitely something here. I think, obviously they have a lot of depth up front, and, Parasak's been put in a position where he's got great line mates, but, the way that he finds those scoring areas and makes himself available, I think is a big reason why he's put up more than a goal per game at this point. And, just saying that out loud, it's like more than a goal per game, 18 in his first 17. That's incredibly impressive for somebody that does not have much experience at this level. And, what you hope for is that he can sort of go through the ebbs and flows of the season and keep that level. Maybe it's not, the pace he's on right now where it's almost 2 points a game, like 30 and 17. But I think he has the chance to really load up some numbers, as you mentioned, because this Cougar squad, I mean, it's certainly not just him. You got Zach Funk, the veteran, leading them, with 33 points. And then you got NHL picks like Riley Heidt and Cohen Zemer, who, I think those were the guys we kind of expected to lead the charge this year, or at least take another step. And yeah, they're playing really well, but Parascak has just been this wonderful surprise. And I just want to see it keep going. It's a fun ride. It's fun to watch Prince George play.
Yeah, and Andre Becker, another guy who's racking up the points for them there. So the pressure really isn't on any one of those guys to keep producing because they've got enough depth, and it must make them just play a little bit freer, wouldn't you say?
I would say so because, if you're having an off night or, if you're banged up, you don't have to worry that it's all going to fall apart. And, and just in terms of matchups, when teams are playing you, they have to decide, okay, well, who are we going to put our best shutdown guys on? Because if you leave one line open, you might get burned by the other. And so it's like a great problem to have that you have that depth. And again, like we've been saying, you're getting that surprise scoring from a guy like Parascak, and that just makes it all the better for the Heights and the Zemers of the world, where you knew the pressure was going to be on. You get drafted, you want to put your best foot forward. You might even be thinking about a World Junior camp tryout at the least for Canada. To know that you're allowed to have an off night, to know that you're allowed to continue to round out your game, and it doesn't have to be, points every night as long as you're playing the right way and as long as the team's winning. That's a tremendous benefit for a major junior squad.
And for kids at this level, I've talked to a few guys this year, and maybe more so in years past. They've been talking about consistency. Is that just? Do you find that it's a maturity thing, that maybe these kids are just slightly more mature than we've seen in the past, and that's the kind of thing that they're thinking of is having to be more consistent throughout the whole year?
I think that's fair, and I think it all comes into how much more prepared kids are these days. And, in a lot of ways, you say like, oh, it's becoming a business earlier and earlier with kids, especially at the elite level, which is obviously where the CHL is drawing from for the most part, other than the occasional late bloomer here and there. But the upshot of all the training and how serious the kids take it is that they do learn those lessons earlier on. And, the fact that they're coming from high-end programs, well, whether it's the sports schools out west, whether it's, the GTHL in the Greater Toronto area where so many NHL stars are developed at the U16 level and obviously before that. I mean, it's sort of good to learn it now and learn how to be kind of a pro, even though you are still a teenager, because it's going to help down the line. It won't be so much of a shock to your system when you're getting to what you hope to be the NHL level and you see just what it takes. As a sort of sidebar on this note, you know, I just wrote a huge cover story on Brad Marchand for the magazine that that we're closing this week, and obviously he had a pretty solid career in the Quebec League, but he was saying when he got to the pro level, he trained with David Krejci in one summer, and he realized he had so far to go. Right, like to be an NHLer and to be with the Boston Bruins in particular, the level is so high. So Marchand is now, he's been paying that forward during his time where when there are young kids coming up, he wants them to see what the standard is and how high it is. And I think you look at a player like Matthew Poitras, who has been integral to the Bruins so far this season because obviously they lost Krejci and Bergeron down the middle. I do wonder, Poitras coming out of the Guelph Storm, I would say he's at least a year early to the NHL. I don't think any of us really expected him to make that leap right away, but give credit to him and all the prep he did in the summer to put himself in a position to succeed and therefore help the Boston Bruins, who are once again one of the hottest teams in the NHL, just like they were last year.
Isn't it like Boston Bruins fans must just be, giddy seeing Matthew Poitras come in and thinking like, oh no, we lost Krejci, we lost Bergeron. Here comes this new second round pick that's been in the OHL, and much like Bergeron, making it a little bit earlier than he would have been expected. Not to compare him, but just to have somebody that can fill that roster spot and come in and have veteran pieces surround him so that he can, hopefully turn into something close to what either Bergeron or Krejci were one day.
Yeah, exactly. And, for the Bruins, the benefit was that they could slot guys into better spots because they had somebody like Poitras who can play top six. In particular, I'm thinking about like Charlie Coyle. Ideally, he's a third line center. And, before the Poitras revelation, if you will, you were looking at a depth chart where Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle were your two top centers, and that's not ideal. The fact Poitras showed in training camp that he could play with skill guys and that he could also produce if you put him with more bottom six guys, I think proved to the Bruins, it's like, okay, well, we can slide this kid up and down the lineup, but, we have roles to fill. And they've got the skilled wingers, whether it's Marchand or Pasternak, they've got the high-end players. So they just had to make sure they had a guy that could fill the role, play a two-way game and support what we know is a team with a great blue line and two excellent goaltenders. So, to me, it's one of the great training camp stories this year is the fact that Poitras was able not only to crack the lineup, but to be exactly what the Bruins needed.
Yeah, and we expected, Bedard to stick in Chicago. We expected Kevin Korchinski to be given a really long leash to make Chicago as well. We knew that Matt Savoie and Zach Benson were going to get a chance in Buffalo, but I don't think anybody expected Matthew Poitras. I don't even think Matthew Poitras expected to be on Boston at this point of the season.
No, exactly. So, huge credit to him. And again, it was just, it's not like he's a huge hulking player where you could say, oh, well, he's already got NHL size. He's like a fairly mid-sized player, and he'll get stronger over the years, and that'll only help him further. But the fact that he's been able to do what he's been able to do so far is just awesome.
Played lacrosse in the summer growing up. His brother's a big lacrosse player, so probably helped him in the physicality there. Quickly, back to PG for 1 second, and I just want to, last year the Mooseheads led the CHL with 335 goals. The Winnipeg Ice had 325 goals. PG, over or under 325 goals this year?
Ooh, you know what? I'm gonna say they do it. Yeah, I'll take the over on that because I think that they, like we've been talking about, they have enough guys that, you know, different people can step up. And, you know, again, I'm getting really sort of like in the weeds here, but if none of them make the World Junior team, they're going to have some games where they might be playing some normally high-end squads missing their best players. So you could see some surprise 7-1, 8-1 games in late December, early January that sort of push the total higher.
We'll stick out in the West, and they led. They were one of the top-ranked teams, or they were the top-ranked team for a few weeks, and that's the Portland Winterhawks. The thing that I love about the Winterhawks every year is you look at that roster, and drafted, signed by Portland. It's no different this year. They have maybe 3 guys on the roster that weren't drafted by Portland, but 2 of those guys hadn't even played a dozen games with the team that drafted them. It's just Josh Davies, who hadn't spent basically his entire career in Portland, which I just, when you look across all the rosters on all 60 of our teams, that's impressive. And to be as consistent as they are year end and, year in and year out, Mike Johnson's got quite the program going there.
He really does. And I mean, to me, this is one of those major junior franchises that you can always kind of count on. It's like the London Knights in the OHL. I think at this point you can probably put, the Quebec Remparts and the Halifax Mooseheads in that category where, maybe they have an off year, but it's never really that bad. And, I look at teams that always kind of hit on their import picks because there's no guarantee. I mean, you really have to sell these kids, and the majority of them from Europe, on coming over to North America, coming to a country that maybe they've never been to as a teenager, a language that they might only kind of speak. But you pitch the fact that the CHL is a tremendous route to the pro game and the NHL. And, Portland has definitely been one of those teams during Mike Johnson's tenure where, as you say, you look at some of the guys that are very good at drafting, but then you look at the import picks and you look at what Jan Spunar has done for them in net this year. 925 save percentage, 9-2-1 record right now. You look at Merrick Alsher coming in and giving them a lot of great size on the blue line. And they always seem to have at least one guy up for the draft that's intriguing. And right now I'm looking at Diego Budazzoni, where he obviously got off to a fantastic start. Not the biggest kid in the world, but again, gets the job done. And if you are an NHL team and you're drafting, you can look at Portland and say, okay, well, it's a good development program. So we are confident selecting a player that's probably going to spend another couple of years there.
Which is, again, like you mentioned, some of those other teams, but we see that year in and year out from the London Knights as well, where there's somebody that gets drafted that wasn't really on anybody's radar, but they're like, oh, he's playing for the London Knights. We have faith in what they do, and when it comes time to sign him, he'll be ready for us.
Exactly. It's just like a nice little check mark on the list where you say, okay, well, we believe in that system. We've seen the results before. Consistently we're seeing Winterhawks make it to the NHL and make an impact, and that counts for something.
Sticking out in the WHL, we got there's the next 3 teams are kind of right around each other, and that'd be the Moose Jaw Warriors, which are led by Jagger Ferguson. He's having another tremendous year. Another guy who is smaller in stature, and he's really hoping for a spot on the World Junior team. Obviously, they've got Braden Yager and Den Matejchuk on that team as well, who are the core guys there. You got the Saskatoon Blades, who have been stumbling a little bit lately, but that's another team that should be dangerous again this year. And then another team that's really caught fire recently in the Wentachee Wild. And like I mentioned earlier, they're without Benson and Savoie, but they've rattled off 8 wins in a row there. First, what do you think of the jerseys?
I like them. I don't think they're too different from when they were in the BCHL. They give me kind of like old Minnesota Timberwolves vibes, the NBA team. So yeah, I think they're pretty solid. To be honest, the name Ice never really like sang for me, because every team plays on ice. So the Wild, they're in Washington State, obviously, a lot of forestry there, a lot of mountains and whatnot. So I think it's a pretty appropriate name. So yeah, I like it.
And, you know, with Wentachee, what to the fans out there, what do you think their odds of getting a Benson and a Savoie, or one or the other? I know Benson's hurt right now, and Savoie just is getting back into the lineup, but assuming that both of those guys will probably play at the World Juniors, but what do you think the odds are that they come back, and because that will just completely change the landscape of that team?
Certainly. I do think ultimately that they both go back. I think if Savoie had not been hurt at that Sabres Prospect Challenge, because I was there for his first game against Montreal, and he was electric. I mean, so was Zach Benson. But obviously Benson continued on and made the Sabres out of camp. But if Savoie had actually gotten a real Sabres training camp, that probably would have helped. I think this is probably kind of one of those Shane Wright situations from last year, except they don't get traded from their junior team. I think, what you do is you let him hang around for a bit, and obviously Benson, needs to recover, so we'll have to wait till he gets back. But I think probably the most prudent thing for Buffalo to do right now is to send both Savoie and Benson back to Wenatchee, or, depending on the timing, maybe they go straight to Canada's World Junior Camp. But you want to see both of them as leaders on that World Junior squad, because it's going to be a very interesting year for Canada. If Kevin Korchinski sticks in Chicago, and it really looks like he will, because he's already broke that, 9-10 game barrier that we always talk about with the contract slide, Owen Beck will basically be the only returning player, because only Bedard and Fantilli were also still eligible to return. And obviously they're going to be a bit busy in the NHL, so I wouldn't expect them to get assigned there. But the result is that it's a really open field for Team Canada. And, Savoie and Benson would be incredibly dynamic. They're both great competitors. Benson, it was awesome that he made the Sabres, but he wasn't playing a ton when he was in the game. And, a young player like that, you want him getting minutes. You want him playing in all situations, frankly. If he goes back to Wenatchee, put him on the penalty kill. Do the same for Savoie. Give them all the opportunities they can, because we know that they're going to be in the NHL soon. And I would also say, the one thing I've been thinking of, again, in terms of timelines, is eventually the Sabres are going to get Jack Quinn back from injury.
Right.
Had a great OHL career with the Ottawa 67s. They'll get him back. That's one more roster spot that would have to be fought for. And obviously Quinn is older and, already played in the NHL. So why not use that development time for Benson and Savoie, where, as you mentioned, Wenatchee's already a great squad. They had a lot of success in the playoffs when they were in Winnipeg. Go for that title. You got Connor Geekie as well, so you have a ton of high-end talent. I wouldn't be surprised if all three of them make Canada's World Junior squad. How fun would that be? But to me, it just makes sense, especially because the Sabres aren't playing that great. You might as well use that development time and do the right thing for the players.
And you got Graham Swart on the Wild, who's currently leading the team in scoring as a defenseman. So they still got a lot of great pieces there. Quickly touch on the World Juniors. It's in Sweden this year. Do you think that's going to help Team Canada because there's going to be so many new faces and they're going to have to go away and they won't have as many distractions?
It's an interesting point. Canada typically doesn't play as well in Europe as they do in North America, but I think that's starting to change a little bit. It's really going to come down to the mix of players that they land on, and goaltending in particular. I mean, that's been something that in recent years they've kind of got lucky where, somebody has taken the job, and it hasn't necessarily been the kids that they brought to summer camp. Joel Hofer, years ago, when it was in Czech Republic, comes to mind in particular. But who is it this year? Dom DiVincentis with North Bay. I know he's hurt right now, but is he the best option? Is it Carson Bjarnason with the Brandon Wheat Kings? Like, they're gonna have to figure out who's the guy that sort of carries the mail for them in net. Otherwise, they're gonna have weapons, but it's really gonna come down to the mix. And I think you make a good point about the team coming together and not being under such a searing spotlight, because there won't be as much North American media over there. But I'm going to be there. I'm going to ask them super tough questions just to keep them on their heels. No.
Good. We appreciate that. We got to keep them honest, right?
Keep their feet to the fire.
That's right.
When I ask them which NHL players they look up to.
If we head to the OHL now, we touched on the Kitchener Rangers a little bit, but maybe we can just dive in a little bit more on them, especially guys like Hunter Brzustewicz, who was leading the O in scoring for a while. He's got 28 points to start off the year. Carson Rehkopf, who's gotten off to a great start, 18 goals, 33 points for him. I don't think Kitchener, I don't think they were expecting to get the Schmitz and the Machars back. So does that, having those guys come back and the run that they're on now, does that kind of change, you think, what they were planning on doing this year?
I think it's really kind of crystallized the opportunity they have. And obviously they're going to have to fend off London as usual, right? I mean, it's a fantastic rivalry in the O. But I think Carson Rehkopf, to me, has been kind of the linchpin. I mean, Brzustewicz has been incredible, and that's been one of the great stories of the early OHL season. But the fact that Rehkopf has been so consistent, I think, is the key, because, the reason Seattle was able to draft him in the second round is scouts were a little worried during his draft year last year about his consistency. You had a big guy that could score and move, so it's like all those boxes were checked off. But could he do it night in and night out? This season, we've seen him do it consistently, and that's obviously been humongous for them. I think, too, I was talking to Meshar over the summer, and he was saying, last year in Kitchener, we had great guys, a lot of talent, but during the regular season, for whatever reason, we just weren't as good as we should have been. And they got the big first-round playoff upset, so that was great. But it kind of felt like last year was still a disappointment for Kitchener. So I wonder if this year is almost kind of like the revenge tour. And with Brzustewicz taking a huge step forward, with Rehkopf becoming more consistent, getting Meshar back, getting Roman Schmidt back on the blue line, they have the pieces in place where they can really do some damage. And that's what we've seen early on.
Jackson Parsons got his third shutout of the season last night, so they're getting timely goaltending as well. Adding to the rivalry between Kitchener and London would be Henry Brzustewicz, Hunter's younger brother, who's playing on the Knights this year. So that adds a little bit more sibling rivalry into that great rivalry as well. We've touched on London, and we know what London is, and that they're going to be right there, and they're always exciting. What about the Eastern Conference? Because once again, it looks like it could be anybody's game out there.
Yeah, I mean, the team that really has been impressive so far is Mississauga, um, because they're still very young. And heading into the season, they had a 17-year-old goaltender in Ryerson Leaders and a 16-year-old goaltender in Jack Ivankovic, who, kind of a rare first rounder uh, in net. Just like in the NHL, like if you're going to be a goalie and go that high, you got to be pretty special. And I remember seeing him at the OHL Cup last year, and it's like, okay, yeah, I definitely see it. Even though he didn't have a ton of size, and he still could grow. Um, but it feels like the Steelheads are ahead of schedule. And Porter Martone, I mean, he's just one of my favorite players to watch because he's big and he's nasty, but he's also skilled. And, for the Steelheads to be as good as they are right now, uh, it's just a testament to what coach and GM James Richmond has put together. And, Luke Misa, who's Michael Misa's older brother, he's up for the draft this year. I think he's already done himself a lot of favors with his start and the points he's put up. So just an exciting time for Mississauga because they, like I said, they feel they're a little ahead of schedule. And, you look at like North Bay and they're a really tough team to play against, and they got some high end talent. They got some great blue liners from Ty Nelson to Tanias Mathurin, where they got a lot of different skill sets back there. And then, of course, when DiVincentis is healthy, he's probably one of the best goalies in the league. But right now, for me, it's fun to watch Mississauga.
Yeah, I'm with you. Mississauga is great. Martone, like you said, he's electric. I talked to him last week, and he told me that James Richmond this year said, "We believe in us." So, and they do right now. They have all the confidence in both of their goalies, and top to bottom in the lineup. They're an exciting team, and they don't want to wait till next year. They want to do it this year, and they want their veterans that aren't going to be around next year to get a championship this year. So they're a fun team to keep an eye on for sure. Um, let's since we talk about Martone, he's a late birthday, so he's not eligible for this draft, which gets us excited for the 2025 draft. But I know you're a prospect guy, so who's been in your opinion so far, just in the really early goings of this season, the most impressive 2024 draft eligibles? And obviously Zane Parekh got his first hat trick last night. But we've got Berkeley Catton, Sam Dickinson, um, Ryder Ritchie, Caden Lindstrom looks like a monster out there.
Mm.
Who's impressed you the most?
Well, I think Ritchie and Lindstrom have been great out west, and as you mentioned, because Lindstrom has such excellent size to go along with his skill, that's a player that you say, okay, well, how high can he go? I mean, I think Medicine Hat was a team that, they got Gavin McKenna, so they were obviously going to be kind of must see TV coming into the season, anyways. But I think Lindstrom has done himself a lot of favors. Berkeley Catton's kind of a favorite of mine. Just the way that he played at the Hlinka Gretzky tournament for Canada in the summer, that was massive. And he's such a smart guy. He's a leader. Obviously, he can put up points. To me, Sam Dickinson with London is the most intriguing because he's already good at the things that you usually have to teach young players. I see him as like maybe kind of a Jacob Chikrin kind of player, or even like a more of a throwback defenseman where he's got great size, he's physical, he can clear at the crease, he can kill plays in the corners, but he got off to a great offensive start with the Knights, which was kind of a bonus because when I think of Sam Dickinson, I think of a guy that could be like an elite shutdown defenseman with some two-way ability. Now we're already seeing some offense. I would say maybe a little ahead of schedule. And again, he's playing for a great program in London, so he's going to get all the development that he needs and great coaching and a great support system there. But for me, I think Dickinson's put himself in a place right now where he should be definitely in that top 5 conversation, and at least in the conversation to be the first defenseman off the board. Now, does it turn out to be Artem Levshunov? at Michigan State University, perhaps. But I think when teams look at Dickinson, they're going to see a player that has all the NHL tools already and could be one of those rare defensemen that joins the league as a teenager. Maybe it's not next year, maybe it's the year after, but I feel like his runway is pretty short in terms of getting to the NHL.
Well, you look at just the team he plays for, and when was the last time you saw a 16-year-old defenseman playing the minutes he was playing last year in the playoffs for the London Knights?
Exactly. And you look at the talent they had and the talent they still have on that back end. It really speaks to how much the Hunters trusted Sam Dickinson. And, I know they played him with a number of different players last year just to sort of see, where he could fit in and give him different kinds of looks. But that trust has certainly paid off already this season.
And then you got Maxim Massé out in Chicoutimi, who should be the top Quebec player off the board. I also want to quickly touch on the 2025 draft because, like I mentioned, you got Porter Martone there. You got a number of guys that were at the Hlinka Gretzky and at the U18s that just had the late birthdays. So you got Malcolm Spence, Roger McQueen, goaltender Gabriel Dag in Victoriaville, Jordan Gavin in Tri-City, and that doesn't even factor in Michael Misa, who will be first-year eligible in the 2025 draft as well.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And it's funny with a couple of those kids, I keep having to remind myself they have another year, like Roger McQueen, because of all the international experience he already has with Canada. It's like, no, we got to wait for him. Porter Martone, that one's already drilled in my head because, I live in Toronto, so I'm not far from Mississauga. But for me, like I've always been a big Malcolm Spence guy. Again, dating back to the OHL Cup, where he was so good for that Mississauga team that went all the way. Him and Michael Misa. Misa broke Connor McDavid's tournament scoring record. That was very exciting to witness. But Malcolm Spence, overtime, Hlinka Gretzky tournament for the gold medal. He's the guy. It was one of those situations almost similar to Connor Bedard at the World Juniors last year when Canada needed that overtime goal. You could tell Bedard was like, I'm taking that puck, I'm going all the way. I'm ending this now. With that overtime at Hlinka Gretzky, I mean, that was like up in the air. And that was a game, Canada, I mean, they were certainly favored in. Spence, breakaway. In my mind, when I was watching that breakaway, I'm like, he's getting, it's like, this is the kind of player he is. He's a big moment player. And he buried it. And it's going to be very exciting. I mean, obviously, Misa kind of has the inside track. If we're thinking about first overall, it's him, James Higgins, who plays, for USA Hockey's NTDP. But for me, it's like, well, Spence is bigger, and yeah, he's a winger, and Misa's a center, so you give a mark to Misa on that one. But, I mean, there's a lot to like about Malcolm Spence. And, the Erie Otters aren't like the strongest team necessarily this year. They're going to keep growing, and obviously, this is not Spence's draft year. So this season's kind of gravy in that respect. But being a late birthday, I mean, he's going to be expected to really kind of take over next year. And I think he meets those high expectations because he's got so much going for him.
How much does having all that international experience that those guys have, like when I talk to Porter Martone, you start looking at some of the stuff and it's like, wow, he won a gold, a silver, and a bronze for Team Canada last year at the U17s, U18s, then Hlinka Gretzky. How much is that going to benefit them as they go into, this year and even into next year in their draft year?
It's pretty solid. And, it's kind of weird with those late birthdays where it's like, okay, you're going to have like an early Hlinka Gretzky tournament if you do make it. But then the benefit sometimes is you get into the World Under 18s because, the pool is smaller because obviously the CHL playoffs are going on at the time. The one that I think is kind of universally a great opportunity is the U17s, which are on right now, because you get kids that are pretty much all rookies in the CHL. They're finding their place. It's a new level of hockey. They're playing older, stronger competition. It's not easy right at the start. But then You go to this tournament, you're back against your peer group, you get your confidence going, maybe you pop in a couple more goals, and then you come back to your junior franchise, and it's almost like a revelation where it's like, okay, I'm in the mix right now, and you see a lot of kids take off after that tournament. So I think all that international play, whatever the tournament is, it can really help young players for sure.
Well, not to keep talking about Porter Martone being his cheerleader here today, but he was one of those guys last year, hadn't scored, went to the under 17s, had a really good under 17s, and scored in his first game back. Zane Parekh is another guy, hadn't scored, goes to the under 17s. He comes back, and then he just goes on and breaks the OHL rookie goal scoring record for defensemen. So obviously, it does work. We've got a Canada versus Canada quarterfinal matchup today, so it'll be exciting to see who comes out of that one and who moves on in the under 17s. But definitely one of my favorite international tournaments to see, because you see who will be starring for Canada for the next potentially decade if you get into the Olympics and stuff like that.
Indeed. And, I do like that they're down to 2 Canada teams now. I think it's better to sort of concentrate the higher end kids. I think the familiarity they get with each other heading into tournaments like the U18s, particularly the World Juniors, I think that's one almost disadvantage Canada has, is that there's too many good players, so they don't necessarily have the familiarity where, the kids in Finland, the kids in, Czechia, kids in Sweden, they've all been playing together for years.
Well, if you wanted to go back and see which Canadians participated in the under 17s or other international events, or just see what they did, NHL players, what they did back when they were in junior, we can now go on to the Hockey News archive and we can pull up some old archives. Tell me a little bit about that. How long has this been in the works? Because as a big Hockey News fan myself, I was elated to see this come about.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a big project. We have 76 years worth of hockey history. It's a compendium like no other. I mean, nobody else has that catalog. And it got delayed because of the pandemic, but it's finally here. It's glorious. I got a sneak peek because we put out a special issue where we did classic covers, and we were going through the archive, and just some of the stories. You look at the first time that we talked to an Eric Lindros, for example, or the very first time that we talked to Wayne Gretzky when he was with, the first Gretzky cover, I should say, when he was at the Indianapolis Racers. I was reading the article, and he's saying, well, I just hope I can stick with the team. And it's like, yeah, Wayne, I think you'll be okay on the Racers. But it's fun to see that stuff, and it's fun to see what people were saying about Eric Lindros back then. Steve Yzerman was another one where, there's a great quote from Jimmy Devellano, who's saying, he was forever indebted to old Peterborough coach Dick Todd because he always rolled his lines. So teams didn't see as much of Yzerman as they should have, and therefore the Red Wings were able to pick him up. I think it was 4th in the draft, if I'm not mistaken. So he's like, thank God for Dick Todd, not playing Yzerman 25 minutes a night, because then we were able to snag him. But just going through the old issues, checking out all the old covers, it's so fun. And if you subscribe to the Hockey News, and you get access to all of it. And I mean, again, for me, it's just, I was so excited about it, and being able to look through it is just, it's just like a hockey fan's dream, because no matter who you follow, we have covered them.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you can fall down a long rabbit hole and just find a treasure trove of great things that are in there. Ryan, what's coming up next for you guys? I know you said you're just finishing up on a couple of issues. What can we expect from you guys?
Yeah, so Brad Marchand on the cover of the magazine that we're actually closing today. So that'll be coming out in the next week or two. And then after that, World Junior Special, one of my favorites, previewing every country. I'm going to have features on guys from some of the bigger nations as well. So that'll be the issue after the one with Marchand on the cover that also has kind of a deep dive on Boston turning 100. Got quotes from a lot of Bruins legends about what it means to be a Bruin. Guys like Zdeno Chara, Ray Bourque, Brad Park, Cam Neely. So that's going to be a fun one as well.
Awesome. Ryan, thank you very much for joining me today. As always, it's great to chat with you.
Indeed. Thanks so much for having me.
That's it. That's all for today. Thanks for listening or watching. See you next week when, once again, we'll check in with a pair of teams from the CHL Top 10 rankings.